Is a world rid of nuclear weapons possible, or is it just a naive fantasy? At a time when fears over nuclear warfare are higher than they've been in decades, proponents of nuclear dissuasion have been chided this year by the Norwegian Nobel Committee, which awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN. We're in Geneva today to meet the campaign's executive director, Beatrice Fihn. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, the issue of nuclear warfare, nuclear threat, is more than ever in the news. We've just seen US President Trump take a very harsh stance at the Iran nuclear deal after his standoff with Kim Jong-un and the nuclear developments in North Korea. So how real would you say are the risks today, bearing in mind that dissuasion has been working for years, so why not now?
Well, I think the risks are very real. Every day, nuclear-armed submarines are patrolling around our seas. You have silos where nuclear missiles are pointing at certain targets. And I think that we just managed to forget about it a little bit for quite a few decades. I think the developments in North Korea, the election of Donald Trump as the US president, has really put a focus on the fact that these are individual people with the power to destroy the world.
You did call Donald Trump a moron on Twitter, paraphrasing Rex Tillerson. Do you mean to say that morons in the 21st century are making nuclear deterrence irrelevant?
Threatening to indiscriminately slaughter hundreds of thousands of civilians as a method of protecting oneself is no longer relevant. It's a stupid idea. Nuclear weapons don't make us safe. We can't win a nuclear war. Threatening to totally destroy a whole country, developing nuclear arsenals, wanting to increase number of nuclear weapons. Yeah, it's moronic.
There are quite a few nuclear states, although they're a minority. So what about the other nuclear weapon states? France, the UK, Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, though it's never admitted or denied that it had nuclear weapons. Are there good nuclear states and bad nuclear states?
Well, that's the thing. I think there aren't. I think all countries that rely on weapons of mass destruction for protection, that threatens to cause such painful, first of all, death and destructions to many, but also extremely painful consequences for those that survive. It's unspeakable suffering, nuclear weapons. And it's not something that countries that believe in humanitarian law, human rights, democracy should threaten to use.
The Non-Proliferation Treaty has not prevented the nuclear states from investing heavily in nuclear weapons in recent years. There are about 15,000 warheads in the world today. To have an idea, could you tell us how deadly could just one of those be?
I think that there's obviously a huge amount of different types of nuclear weapons, and it depends a little bit on where and how populated the area. But there's a huge blast that will knock out everything. And the long-term consequences, we see in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, people still are suffering from the consequences. The environment is poisoned. We see in the nuclear test sites all around the world that women have difficulties giving birth. There's a higher degree of cancers. It's really a weapon that cannot be contained in time. It goes over generation and space. The radiation spread with winds to other areas that are not involved in this conflict. If there was a nuclear war in North Korea, for example, that would impact China, Japan, South Korea with the radiation. And right now, the United States and all the other armed states have this as well. So I'm just taking the United States as an example, have a nuclear-armed submarine. On it contains the explosive power of 7 World War IIs. And 60 million people died in World War II. And they have 10 of these submarines patrolling the world all the time. So 70 World War IIs, the explosive power of 70 World War IIs is patrolling.
ICAN's work has been central in the negotiations that led to the nuclear weapon ban treaty adopted last July at the UN. It's legally binding for the states who sign up to it. Problem is it's not binding for those who don't, and they're precisely the nuclear weapon states. We've seen France, the UK and the US declaring that they'd have nothing to do with it already. NATO is against it. How do you get around that?
We see with other weapons like chemical and biological weapons, landmines and cluster munitions, that once they are prohibited, and even if not all states sign on to it initially, a stigma grows around these weapons. This treaty is meant to help that. But I think this is also a tool for starting campaigning nationally, such as divestments from nuclear weapons producers. This treaty prohibits assistance with developing nuclear weapons. And therefore, we think we can go to banks, for example, and say, if you're based in a country that has signed this treaty, you shouldn't be able to invest money in producing nuclear weapons. I think that can be a very strong incentive as well. Nuclear weapons are hugely expensive. And governments like the UK or France have to decide, are we going to put this on a weapon that we can't use, that only kills civilians? Or are we going to put it on what actually protects us from 21st century threats? Terrorism, climate change, organized crime, that kind of things.
In the end, doesn't it all come down to the fact that war is lucrative? The weapons industry is lucrative for states, for companies, for banks. Banks have invested some $500 billion in nuclear weapons between 2013 and 2016. So in the face of that, how do you make nuclear disarmament bankable, really?
It's definitely a challenge in the entire weapons field. But I also think that there are opportunities to capitalize on this. For example, we had just a few years after the Cluster Munitions Convention that prohibits cluster bombs was entered into force. The United States did not participate in the negotiations or sign the treaty. But just last year, the last American company that produced cluster munitions pulled out of that production and cited the growing international stigma and the divestment campaigns that banks had withheld capital from this company because of that. And I think that was quite interesting to see that these companies do respond to these kind of processes. And the money that pays for this is our tax money. So I think we have to just also demand that our money goes to other things. We need to make a huge push, and I hope that this Nobel Peace Prize for our campaign can inspire people to act. In the end, I believe in democracy. I believe that if people demand it, it will change.
Beatrice Fihn, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.